The rain poured like bullets, hammering the deck of the Iron Wrath, flagship of the legendary pirate king, Captain Vargas. He stood at the helm, defiant against the storm, clutching a gleaming obsidian amulet, the Eye of the Maelstrom, in his fist. The amulet was the prize of his latest plunder, ripped from a Spanish treasure galleon after a bloody skirmish. As lightning split the sky, the storm seemed to pulse, as if responding to the cursed relic in Vargas's grip, crackling with an energy that sent a chill through his crew. Around Vargas, his fleet struggled to maintain formation in the swelling seas. The howling wind whipped ropes and tore sails. Yet the pirate king stood unwavering, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon. His men were loyal, bound to him by oaths of gold and blood, and tonight they would stand by him, weathering any storm that dared challenge his command. Little did they know, danger brewed not only in the skies above but within their ranks. A web of treachery spun from envy and ambition threatened to unravel them all. Below deck, in the shadows cast by flickering lanterns, 3 of Vargas's most trusted lieutenants whispered urgently. Hawke, the sharp-eyed navigator with a hidden dagger always strapped to his belt. Reyes, a mountain of a man with fists like iron. And Laney, a woman as cunning as the sea itself. All shared one burning desire: to take Vargas's throne. To them, the amulet was not just a relic but a source of unimaginable power, a force that, if controlled, would make them rulers of the Caribbean. Before we dive into this dangerous adventure, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. As they plotted, the storm above reached a fever pitch. Waves loomed like mountains, crashing against the ships with bone-rattling fury. Vargas, oblivious to the mutinous whispers below, raised the amulet toward the heavens, shouting words in an ancient tongue he did not understand. The relic pulsed with a dark light, and the sea seemed to shudder in response. Suddenly, the skies above the fleet grew eerily still. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breathing of the men gripping the railings. Then, with a roar that seemed to come from the ocean's depths itself, a wave the size of a fortress rose before the fleet, towering higher than anything they'd seen. The crew screamed, scrambling to secure themselves, while Vargas merely grinned, clutching the amulet tighter. He believed himself invincible, but his lieutenants knew better. If they didn't act now, the pirate king would lead them all to ruin. But with the storm and the unnatural wave bearing down on them, any betrayal would be as perilous as it was desperate. And so, as the walls of water crashed down around them, the stage was set. The storm had only just begun, and the fate of the pirate king's fleet, and perhaps the souls of all aboard, hung in the balance. The storm had not loosened its grip. Waves lashed with the fury of a creature awakened, and the men fought to keep the ships afloat, as the very sea seemed determined to swallow them whole. Lightning painted the night in searing bursts, illuminating the terrified faces of the crew who had long believed themselves fearless. The Eye of the Maelstrom continued to pulse, its dark light shining like a beacon of doom in Captain Vargas's hand. As the fleet was battered by unending waves, whispers of fear began to twist into open resentment. The men cursed the storm, but more so, they cursed the amulet that Vargas held so fiercely. Below deck, among the dim lanterns and huddled crew, Hawke, Reyes, and Laney saw their opportunity growing. This storm, unnatural and unrelenting, seemed bound to the relic, and by extension to Vargas's insatiable ambition. The crew feared they'd been cursed, and the lieutenants knew fear was the first ingredient in a mutiny. They'd known Vargas to be power-hungry, but this? Summoning a storm that threatened to devour his own men? It went beyond recklessness. It was madness. And to Hawke, Reyes, and Laney, it was a madness that needed to end. They would take the amulet, rid themselves of Vargas, and turn the fleet toward calmer seas. But every attempt so far had been thwarted by Vargas's unnerving presence on deck. Laney's voice was barely audible over the crashing waves. Tonight, we wait for the next lightning strike, when the crew's distracted. He's got that amulet strapped to his side. All we have to do is get close enough to cut it free. Hawke nodded, his hand instinctively tightening around his dagger. Aye, we'll need the crew with us, though. If he calls them down on us, we'll be swimming with the sharks before we get a chance to take it. Reyes grunted, his expression grim. Don't worry about the crew. They're already halfway to mutiny. That relic's cursed, they know it, and they want nothing to do with it. With the plan set, they waited, hearts pounding with the rhythm of the ocean. Above them, Vargas continued his mad rant to the storm, lifting the amulet toward the sky as if he could command the gods themselves. The lightning illuminated his face, a man consumed by power, oblivious to the chaos he'd unleashed. Finally, the moment arrived. A jagged bolt of lightning split the sky, briefly blinding everyone on deck. In the confusion, the three lieutenants rushed forward, using the blinding flash to close the distance to Vargas. Hawke moved with swift, silent purpose, his dagger ready, eyes fixed on the leather cord that bound the amulet to Vargas's side. But as Hawke reached out, Vargas turned, his dark eyes piercing through the rain. He'd sensed their approach, felt the betrayal in his bones. With a roar, he raised his cutlass, swinging down with all his might, forcing Hawke back. The entire crew froze, stunned by the sudden clash. "What's this? My own lieutenants would dare challenge me?" Vargas's voice boomed, a mixture of anger and bitter amusement. "I give you gold, glory, and now, because of a little storm, you'd turn on me?" Laney's eyes narrowed, her own cutlass drawn. "This isn't a storm, Vargas. It's a curse, and it'll drag us all to the bottom if you don't let go of that relic." "Curse?" Vargas laughed, his voice thick with contempt. "Fools, all of you. This relic is our salvation. With it, I control the seas." As he spoke, the storm surged with greater fury, as if mocking him. The winds howled and a wave rose behind him, a towering wall of water that seemed to hesitate, hanging in the air as though waiting for Vargas's command. The crew took a collective step back, eyes wide with terror. They had never seen anything like this, the sea, answering to a single man. But the lieutenants were undeterred. Hawke lunged forward, swinging his dagger toward the cord securing the amulet. Vargas blocked him again, but Reyes moved in from the other side, his massive arm closing around the captain's neck, pinning him in place. "Take it, Hawke, now!" Reyes growled, muscles straining as he held Vargas in a brutal grip. But Vargas was not so easily subdued. With a feral snarl, he twisted, breaking free and sending Reyes sprawling across the deck. The storm seemed to respond to his fury, a gust of wind flinging men against the mast. In the chaos, the amulet slipped from Vargas's belt, dangling for a split second in midair before Laney lunged, her fingers closing around it. The moment she touched the amulet, the storm went silent. The wind stopped, the rain ceased, and the sea lay as calm as glass. Laney stared at the obsidian amulet in her hand, feeling its power thrumming, alive and hungry. She looked at Vargas, who watched her with a mixture of fear and rage. "Give it back, Laney," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't know what you're playing with." "Maybe not," Laney replied, her grip tightening around the amulet. "But I know what it does to men like you. You'd drown us all for the sake of your pride." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crew, the spell of Vargas's leadership broken. With a final furious glare, Vargas lunged for Laney, his hand outstretched to reclaim his dark prize. But Reyes stepped in his way, delivering a punch that sent Vargas stumbling back, his footing slipping on the slick deck. Laney, now the center of the crew's gaze, looked at the amulet, feeling its weight, its pull. She realized with a jolt that the relic wanted to be used, craved to call forth power and destruction. It whispered to her, the same whispers that had driven Vargas to madness, and she knew the temptation would consume her if she didn't act fast. Without a word, she hurled the amulet over the side of the ship. It arced through the air, glinting one last time, before vanishing into the depths below. The silence deepened as the crew watched, breathless. But the moment the amulet disappeared beneath the waves, the sea churned again, as if enraged by its loss. The calm shattered as waves began crashing against the ship once more. The storm's fury reignited, no longer bound to Vargas, but unleashed in full wrath upon the fleet. Laney turned, eyes wide with horror. The amulet's curse had not ended with its loss. It had been set free. And now, they were all at the mercy of a storm that knew no master. The men scrambled, shouts and screams rising as the winds lashed out, tossing ships like toys. The fleet was in chaos and Vargas disarmed and dethroned. could only watch as the sea closed in on his once proud ships. As lightning lit the sky and the storm devoured all in its path, the fleet scattered, each ship tossed into the unknown, and amidst it all, Vargas's fury burned, knowing he'd been brought low, not by the sea, but by those he had once called his own. The storm descended with a vengeance that seemed beyond natural forces. Black clouds towered above, swirling into a monstrous vortex that pulled the fleet closer to its center. Ships were tossed like driftwood, their masts snapping, their hulls splintering under the relentless assault. The crew of the Iron Wrath clung to the railings, wide-eyed and desperate, as waves rose to monstrous heights, crashing over the deck and dragging men into the roiling depths. Vargas stood at the helm, drenched and defeated, but his gaze was unyielding. The loss of the amulet, that relic of limitless power, was a bitter wound, but it was the betrayal that struck him deepest. Around him, the crew looked to Laney, Reyes, and Hawke, the new leaders by action, if not yet by oath. They had taken control, their mutiny sealed by the act of casting the cursed amulet into the sea. Yet as the storm grew, it was clear they had unleashed something far worse. They had not broken the amulet's curse. They had unleashed it. Laney, clinging to a mast as the ship pitched wildly, shouted over the roar of the storm, "The amulet's gone, Vargas. There's no power left to be had. Call off the storm if you can." Vargas laughed, a bitter, rasping sound that carried through the chaos. "You fools, the storm doesn't answer to me. It answers to the eye of the Maelstrom, and you've sent it straight to the depths. Now, the sea claims us all." The word sent a chill through the crew. Hawke, his face shadowed in the dim flashes of lightning, exchanged a look with Reyes, both men realizing too late the horror of what they'd done. By severing Vargas from the amulet, they had let the storm's wrath roam freely, with no relic to temper its fury, and no master to call it back. A massive wave surged toward them, rising higher than the main mast, and the men clung to the nearest ropes and railings, praying to any gods that might listen. The Iron Wrath tilted precariously, creaking under the force. Men were thrown across the deck as the ship struggled against the sea's merciless grip, but Vargas held firm, his dark gaze unyielding even as water poured over the sides. In a desperate moment, Laney grabbed hold of Reyes's arm, her voice urgent. "If we don't get control of this ship, we're all going under. We've got one choice: abandon the Iron Wrath and try for the smaller boats." The suggestion struck the crew with a mixture of horror and urgency. Leaving the Iron Wrath, the mighty flagship, Vargas's pride, felt like surrender. But the rising waves and the creaking hull made it clear they had no choice. One by one, the crew scrambled for the lifeboats, each man fighting the torrential downpour and fierce winds that threatened to drag them into the sea. As the men fought to lower the lifeboats, Vargas moved, blocking their path. "Abandon ship? Is that the loyalty I've bought with gold and blood?" He sneered, his hand gripping his cutlass as he looked each man in the eye. "Cowards, all of you." Reyes, his towering frame barely steady against the pitching deck, squared his shoulders. "It's not cowardice, Vargas, it's survival. That relic has cursed us all, and your pride will be the end of us if we stay." With a growl, Vargas lunged, his cutlass gleaming as he struck toward Reyes. Metal clanged as Reyes blocked the attack, countering with a brutal shove that sent Vargas sprawling. The men glanced at each other, shocked at the sight of their former king laid low, but the brutal storm left them no time to process their shifting loyalties. They returned to the lifeboats, lowering them one by one into the churning waters. Hawke, gripping a rope with white-knuckled hands, looked back at Vargas, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "Come with us, Captain. There's no pride to be had at the bottom of the sea." But Vargas only laughed, a dark, hollow sound. "Pride? It's not pride that binds me here, Hawke. It's destiny." He gestured to the storm surrounding them. "This was meant for me. The sea has claimed me, and I'll not run from it." With one last look, the crew descended into the lifeboats, leaving Vargas standing alone on the deck of the Iron Wrath, framed by lightning and fury. The small boats were tossed about like leaves as the men rowed desperately away from the ship, their faces etched with a mix of relief and sorrow. For all his ruthlessness, Vargas had been their leader, the one who had led them to victories and riches beyond measure. But tonight, he had chosen the sea. Just as the lifeboats cleared the side of the ship, a massive wave rose from the depths, crashing down upon the iron wrath with the force of a titan's fist. The flagship disappeared beneath the swell, swallowed whole by the storm. The men in the lifeboats watched in silence, their breaths caught in their throats, as the ship they had called home was consumed by the sea. And then, as if the ocean had finally claimed what it sought, the storm began to abate. The towering waves subsided, the winds fell to a murmur, and the black clouds scattered, revealing the quiet dawn on the horizon. Exhausted, the crew rode in silence, their minds numb with the memory of the night's terror and the loss of their captain. In the days that followed, rumors spread through the Caribbean of a ghostly ship that appeared on stormy nights, its captain standing at the helm, clutching an obsidian amulet that glowed with a cold, dark light. Sailors whispered that it was Vargas himself, returned from the depths as a wraith, cursed to wander the seas in search of the amulet he had lost. And those who claimed to have seen him swore that on the darkest nights, as lightning split the sky and waves crashed against the shore, they could hear his laughter echoing across the waves, proud, defiant, and bound forever to the sea.
Hey there! Quick message, grab a paper, write down, "You Pirate," our channel name. Come back soon, we've got incredible stories you won't want to miss.
The survivors drifted for days under a solemn, unbroken sky, the wreckage of Vargas's once mighty fleet strewn like bones across the endless sea. Exhausted and sunburned, the crew huddled in the lifeboats, nursing wounds both visible and unseen. They had lost more than a captain. They had lost their faith in the very power that had once united them. Now, whispers of curses and legends haunted them, echoing over the silent waters as they rowed toward whatever refuge might await them. After what felt like an eternity, a thin line of land appeared on the horizon. The men, ragged and barely clinging to hope, summoned the last of their strength to row toward the shore. As they approached, they could see the outline of a small, rocky island with a few palm trees leaning over a modest cove. They beached the lifeboats and stumbled onto the sand, feeling the weight of solid ground beneath their feet, as if it were an impossible luxury. Laney, Reyes, and Hawke gathered the remaining crew around a small fire they managed to kindle from driftwood. The flames flickered in the dying light, casting shadows over their worn faces as they stared into the fire, each lost in thought. None of them spoke of Vargas, the cursed amulet, or the nightmarish storm. Those memories, they knew, would be etched in their minds forever, and to speak of them felt like inviting the curse back into their lives. Finally, Reyes broke the silence, his deep voice heavy with exhaustion. "What now? We're scattered, broken. There's nothing left to return to." Hawke, normally quick with a quip or plan, simply stared at the flames, his eyes shadowed and hollow. Perhaps that's the way it's meant to be. The sea took what it wanted, didn't it? But Laney, though weary, held a glimmer of determination in her gaze. "We survived," she said firmly, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. "We have the chance to start again, free of Vargas, free of curses. If nothing else, we're not bound to his madness anymore." The crew murmured in agreement, though the uncertainty lingered. They knew the Caribbean was a dangerous place for pirates without allegiance or a captain's protection. Rival crews would hunt them. The Crown would offer no mercy. And though none dared voice it aloud, there were those among them who feared Vargas might yet return, his ghostly figure emerging from the mist one night, drawn by the betrayal that had sealed his fate. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch, each one haunted by memories of the storm and the cursed amulet. Just as the last embers of the fire began to fade, a sudden disturbance on the beach snapped the men to attention. A figure stood in the shallow surf, barely visible in the pale moonlight, its form wavering like smoke above the water. Hawke's hand flew to his dagger, though his gut twisted with a familiar dread. Who goes there?" The figure did not move, its eyes, if eyes there were, focused on the crew with a depthless gaze. A shiver passed through them as they recognized the unmistakable silhouette, tall, with a familiar stance of defiance, and in its hand, a dark amulet glowed faintly, the eye of the Maelstrom. The men stumbled back, some falling to their knees in terror. Reyes's face was pale, his voice barely a whisper. It can't be. He's gone. We saw the sea take him, but Laney, defiant as ever, took a step forward, though her legs trembled. "What do you want?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her heart. The figure did not respond, but the glow of the amulet grew, casting an eerie light across the beach. And then, in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the sea itself, Vargas's words echoed through the night, haunting and hollow. "The sea does not forget, nor does it forgive." As the last syllable faded, the figure vanished, melting back into the mist as if it had never been. Silence fell over the beach, heavy and impenetrable. The men, shaken and unable to speak, exchanged glances, knowing they had witnessed something beyond mortal understanding. Vargas was gone, yes, but his legend and his curse would linger, as bound to the sea as the tides themselves. In the days that followed, the survivors split, each choosing their own path. Some returned to their lives of piracy, carrying with them the tale of the Pirate King's curse, while others sought redemption in quieter lives far from the reach of the ocean's depths. And though the Caribbean soon teemed with fresh rumors, each tale carried one ominous warning: beware the eye of the Maelstrom, for to touch it is to summon the sea's unrelenting wrath. As for Laney, Reyes, and Hawke, they parted ways, though none of them ever forgot the night that had nearly claimed their lives. Some say Laney sailed west, hunting for relics and artifacts that would protect her from any curse. Reyes found work as a harbor guard in a distant port, haunted by memories of the storm. And Hawke disappeared altogether, leaving only whispers of a sailor who had seen the face of death and refused to speak of it. And sometimes, on dark and stormy nights, sailors claimed to see a ghostly ship cutting through the mist, a lone figure standing at its helm, holding an amulet that glowed with the light of the storm. They said he was searching, always searching for those who had wronged him and cast him to the depths. And so, the legend of the Pirate King lived on, a warning to all who dared seek power from forces they could not control. If ye enjoyed this tale, subscribe to You Pirate for more stories of cursed treasures, ghostly encounters, and the high sea's unforgiving fury. And if ye seek more adventure, click on the next video to explore the darkest secrets of the Caribbean.